This is Forge Daily with Mackenzie Barwell on the Forge Audio Network.
Welcome to this episode of Forge Daily. I'm your host, Mackenzie Barwell, coming to you May 13th, 2024. Because we're coming off a match weekend, I could say, today I'm joined by Steve Milton. He and I debriefed everything that went down between Forge FC and Pacific FC this past Saturday. Of course, as we do here on the Mac and Milty show, we also transition into the coming matchup against Vancouver FC. This time it'll be at home, May 18th at Tim Hortons Field. Even though this Pacific matchup ended 0-0, he and I had a lot to discuss. So I'll throw right to the interview with Milty. Milty, we're back for another episode, and this time your hair looks really good.
Well, that's how I celebrated. Saturday night, I ended up going to my hairdresser's place to get my hair cut. I get 4 a year, one every season, but you can't see it, but still has a little wee in the back there that reminds us of 60. But it's what do we call this? A mullet in training, I think, right now. It's a miltet. It's a miltet. So a miltiet. It'll be, believe me, by the time we get to the fall part of the season, it'll be sticking out again like Einstein's head.
It looks fantastic. I was trying really hard not to mention something before we started recording because I needed the reaction. But listen, we've got another game to talk about. Pacific and Forge. They both walk away with a point. Coach Bobby said he was content with the performance, but what did you see from this?
A couple of things. I think he was. You have to be. If you said beforehand, considering that Pacific has been undefeated, hasn't conceded any goals, has a very narrow field, so that helps them not concede any goals or as many goals. But that's pretty amazing now to have a fifth without any goals. I think he would have been content with the point given, the sandwich kind of schedule they're in for about 3 weeks here right now. And of course, Pacific's going to be fairly content with that point because it comes against a team that they have difficulty beating. And of course, is four-time champion, and just with the one blip being Pacific having beaten them. So I think, well, what did I think of it? I think they did everything that Bobby wanted except one thing. And he emphasized that. Take advantage of those chances that they created. And I thought they created a great number of them, given how clogged they made the center of the field. And given they've got a very dynamic center back there. So I don't know what you thought, but you're going to tell me right now.
Yeah, I mean, Forge not having capitalized on a lot of the opportunities that they created because it's not like there were a lack of them. Pacific were defensively strong, and that was a big topic of conversation both before and after the match. But it's just hard to know whether or not you attribute the lack of scoring to that or Forge's inability to capitalize.
Well, I think it's both. I mean, two things happened there. There were some shots that were missed, but there was also a couple of great saves. I mean, this is a very good. I mean, this guy's going to challenge for a national team goaltender at some point, goalkeeper in their net, and that's Emil Gazdov. He's only 20 years old.
He looks young. I was wondering actually.
He's 20, wow. and Mac. He's from there. He's not from the island, but he's from North Vancouver, and he played. I think he. Yeah, so he's a local boy. They love him. I mean, they absolutely love him. And of their 5 clean sheets, he has 4 of them. So he's really going to challenge for something. So he makes a couple of really big saves, particularly one off Becker at the end on that diving save. I think that was labeled. I don't think it was going wide. He had to knock it in. And now the other thing, there were some missed shots. I mean, Borges Soignier got a little bit unlucky when he hit the crossbar, right? I mean,
that almost looked like a repeat of the Montreal match, eh?
It was, and it was a really gorgeous play. It caught a lot of people by surprise. And let me say this about Becker on the save that was that in the 89th or 90th minute where Gazdov dove across. The move that Kyle made to put that ball there surprised everybody on the field. I don't think it surprised Becker, but it would become close to it. I mean, it was such a beautiful pivot to go the opposite way than everybody had been. So that was a creative. That looked like a striker more than a midfielder.
Totally. It threw me off, to be completely honest with you.
That was. And And I mean, Hamilton played well enough to win in a lot of the 60% possession to 40
Right.
for the teams. But here's a thing that I think is a really interesting stat that speaks to that inability to. They had 9 corners on a small field, 9 corner kicks, and converted 0. I think they might have made 2 good chances out of that. That's simply not enough.
What else, Milty, do you think having the smallest pitch in the CPL would affect? Because a lot of the times when we go into matchups with Pacific, that's a big focus.
I think it's a huge effect because you would tend to load the box a little bit, but it's easier to as a defensive group, but it's easier to do that. I think it creates a tremendous home field advantage, in a lot of ways, given some of the strengths that they've had in the early going. Their front three. Three immediately in front of the goalkeeper have been excellent, but they really have an extreme quality center back in Ellie, and I thought he was as good as anybody on the field, and you could see his sort of pedigree there, and then they've got La Jeunesse, who's very young, and Forge was on the left side, and Forge was unable to take advantage maybe of his inexperience. They got around him pretty good, but they couldn't get past. So because it's easier to fill when there's less. If you beat a guy, which Forge is so good on the wings of doing, if you beat him, there's not as much space when you come back into the middle, either for you to move around, and that's what they've done so well on the 1-2, the give and go, the classic give and go all year from the flanks. Chouanière and Borges particularly well on the one side. Then it's easier for, say, Undom or whoever's playing on that side in the middle to come and fill a little bit. There's a little less room for, let's say, Becker coming up. That really helps, a team. And well, you do that if a team's really good on the outside. You saw it at Tim Hortons Field in the World Cup qualifying when they narrowed the field. Canada deliberately narrowed the field to its minimum that's allowed by FIFA standards, because the Americans are so good on that outside channel, particularly on the 1-2 on the outside. So, and the Americans complained bitterly about that after Canada won 2-0. So, and a huge game. So they really put them on their way to qualifying for the last World Cup. So it's a tactic that people use. I mean, more in BC, it's more, or sorry, in Victoria, or I guess it's Langford. It's more because there isn't a lot of room. They can't move a lot of things there to make that pitch wider, even if they want to. So what do you do then? You build your team around the facility that you have, right? I mean, it's like in the old days, if I can use a baseball analogy, the Yankees had a very short right field. So they had these strong left-handed hitters like Babe Ruth, because it was only, instead of 350 down the line, it was 250 down the line. So you build your team to win. Now, that can cost you on the road. So especially with a small lineup, if you go to a wider field like in Hamilton, right? And Hamilton, of course, would always wants to play. Now I'm talking about the Forge now, not when Team Canada was there. When Forge wants to play on a wider field, and because they're so good outside, and they're getting better because of the manner in which Para is playing. Yeah.
Okay, Milty, you could not have answered that question better.
Oh, I couldn't. I wouldn't. Other people might have been.
Well, I mean, that was fantastic. I didn't know that Team Canada actually deliberately narrowed it. Yeah.
Bobby walked me through that the other day. I'd say about 10 days ago. He walked me out to where the lines were and said, "Here's where the minimum line is."
Wow,
it's pretty significant. I don't know how many yards it is, but it's fairly significant. It's enough for a player to make a getaway through that alley. If you don't play for your home field advantage, you're nuts. You really are. You're bonkers. Go with what you've got.
Well, let's have a look at this Forge side for a second, because you briefly touched on it. Daniel Parra.
Yeah.
He's really showing out. He's really showing why he joined this team and the quality that he brings. He and I believe it was Ali Hojabrpour and Alex Ashton-Yodi-Janssen recognized for CPL Team of the Week. And we saw a bit of a different look for the starting lineup. Coach Bobby talks about this team not having a starting 11. And after a couple times the same guys out for kickoff, he changes it a little bit. This week against Pacific, we saw Kwasi Poku out on the far left for Benny Badabanga. And then the center midfield in particular, I want to talk about because not only a switch up in personnel, but formation a little bit.
For sure. Yeah. So they'd have Jordan up top alone. And then then you'd have across sort of on the secondary. I mean, this is fluid too, right? These guys are allowed to figure it out when they're on the field, when to go, when to come back. But yeah, it was definitely, I think what they started, at least the chart would have had them on a 4-2-3-1.
Right.
But that is almost a paper thing. Mac, to me, because of the manner in which they play and the fluidity. And these guys are experienced. So it's not like football where everybody gets set, or even basketball where it gets set. There's an awful lot of, okay, you got to react to this, and we trust you to react at the time. But putting Borges there in the middle there, and he was still beside Schwanier, but it was good to be able to get that, and he could get the ball up a little bit. And then, let me ask your opinion on this. How much do you think the congested schedule had to do with the changes in the middle there? Given that Kyle Becker is such a key player to the team and they did not start. And they didn't play till well into the 80s.
Quite late in the game. Yeah. Well, I'm sure it was not a coincidence that it was a different group this time around, because they've got a week's worth of training starting today, and then they are back for a midday game next week after playing Vancouver this Saturday.
Which is what they had last week.
Exactly. They got it.
Right. Well, actually, there are 3 games in 8 days, right? Didn't they? No, just 2 games in 4 days. And and they traveled virtually across the country.
Right.
For that. Now, that said, you saw that reflected in Pacific's lineup, too. I think they had 5 different players that played against Ottawa, and they played Ottawa, I think, on the Wednesday night. So they had
that is true
3 or 4 days, and they had to travel and played a really good game. So they had 5 different players in there as well. Now, you're not going to take out either on a small field. You're not going to take out your best your back defender, and they did not substitute at the back with Endom, who's just outstanding.
Yep.
And Forge never even considered it with Alex Jensen as well. You couldn't be without him on that. I mean, on that small.
Well,
field.
Milty also wearing the armband, as you said, starting. So it was kind of cool to see him come into that role for most of the game.
And kudos to Kyle Becker, because when he came on, the announcers, who veteran soccer people, just assumed, because it happens all the time, that if you're the standing captain, which this guy has been since 6 months before this team was actually born or played a game, Kyle's been the captain of this team. Kyle did not take that band back, and I thought that was very, very classy, very classy. I mean, he's basically one of the co-captains. Alex is basically one of the co-captains. He's one of the 3 or 4 guys that have been here the whole time, and they're almost like coaches in the room. And we talked about that before, right? It looks like they hate each other and they come off kissing each other. So, right.
Well, that's interesting, Milty. I actually didn't realize that Bex came on and didn't take the band back.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty sure I saw it still on Alex's arm at the end there. And they did something else there, of course. When they took Noah off, they replaced him with Dom Samuel. They wanted to make sure that they didn't give up that point that looked like it was going to be theirs to have. That was part of it. But what it also did was allow them to maybe try and steal the extra 2 points to get to 3 points there, because now Daniel Perra could move up, right, and stretch the field a little bit by not starting at the back position, not having to run quite as far, because he had Dom back there, right? And he replaced, technically, I think he replaced Noah Jensen maybe. So that allowed Power to move up and potentially score, get some chances. People are starting to they're going to scout him a lot, and if he can keep his wits about him, he's going to get 1 million assists, because he's drawing players to him like, flies to honey. It's unbelievable.
I mean, we talk about fluidity. That substitution in itself, Dom coming in for somebody like Jensen, and then them having to make the changes internally, I think exemplifies that. It
was able to get the ball up to Kyle quickly too. I mean, that was they forced a hell of a save at the end there, close to the end. So
yeah, like we already said, tons, not a lack of opportunities for Forge, but same goes for Pacific. And who is it that steps up? Jassem Koleilat for his debut with Forge in between the goalposts.
What do you think there? What did you think of that?
I was really excited to see him come out because I think, like a lot of other players on this team, he has that mentality where he's always ready to step up. And Coach Bobby talked about it in the post-game press conference. They've got 2 starting goalkeepers. That's the situation that they're in. And they want to keep Jass activated. They want to keep him engaged. Same with Kalongo. And I wouldn't be surprised if we've seen if we will see a little bit more of a rotation going forward.
Well, do you think that might happen with the game sandwiched together? One or the other, either in Montreal or in the game leading up to Montreal.
Well, that's true.
The short. Do you think that? I mean, that's possibly how you do
know.
that.
I'm curious to know whether they approach that in the same way that they would an outfield player. Because at the end,
probably a little different.
Yeah, I would imagine it's a bit different, and so I don't,
because you're not going to sub for a goalie.
Exactly.
You don't want to use one. You look at the way Bobby's used those substitutions this year. It's been pretty brilliant. I mean, he's won a game with that. I would say the York game probably was won on a substitution basis. The manner in which he did it, and it showed well. They almost beat Montreal, and they forced it at the end with the substitutions. If you remember that correctly, they forced Montreal into using 4 players they didn't want to use. They had not planned to use them because they were starters. We can beat these guys. Yeah. Oh, guess what? We can't. We can't fall behind 2-0. They bring them in. They get on the front foot. They dominate for the first 15 minutes. But then Bobby makes his changes. They survive by giving up only the 1 goal. They preferred not to, and they get the chances near the end. Like there was a very interesting, all set up by everybody who touched it on the chances at the end.
Yeah, no, Coach Bobby and the rest of the Forge coaching staff, very strategic, I think, with who they play and when.
It's Koleilat. Is that how we say it? Koleilat. Yeah. He's an interesting guy. He's tall. So, and you saw that on a few that, like, he reached up and he knew exactly where the bar was. And
even sorry to interrupt you, Milty, but I'm getting excited about that one save. I think maybe in the 35th or 36th.
36, or I think I would say 36th minute. Yeah, it was a great save.
Well, it kind of reminded me of the one we saw against Montreal when Jensen made an effort at the bottom left corner. And it was one of those where you're like, wow, that was close. And he just got a touch on it. And you might attribute that to his height, as you said.
Oh, I think so. I think so. I think in Montreal, what they'd said, if that goalkeeper hadn't been 6'4", that's a goal, and they only need a tie in Montreal in 10 days or whenever they go down there in 8 or 9 days. So so yeah, I mean, those kinds of, you got to have that. You got to have that situations, particularly if you're going to play behind somebody like Forge, where they play a possession game, but when it happens, sometimes you can get numbers coming the other way. And every team plays Forge that way, hoping them clogging the middle. It's a bit boring in my mind. Although I have to say, Pacific charged up a little more offensively than I had expected them. Given the team had only scored 5 goals in 4 games, they could have had a couple. And you get that kind of save. Well, you need that kind of save because you're going to have a few minutes where the other team does. That's just the nature of the game. It's very similar to basketball. That game you cannot control for the full time. You just can't. Other teams going to have. They have some quality players too. They're actually paying the same amount of money for the players as you are in most cases. So you're going to see some challenges. And Bobby emphasizes that all the time. Kyle emphasizes that all the time. You've got to be ready. Back 4, particularly the central 2. And the goalkeeper for that 3 or 4 chances that they will get every game. Now they also kicked a couple of field goals there and missed the net as well. But he made a couple of really, really good saves and one that went over the net over the net. You'd say, well, that was bad luck. He was there. If it had been lower, he had the ball. He was there. He was touching the bar.
Yeah.
And when speaking of bars, it's tough on that one that Schwanier put off the it was a rocket.
Sometimes you're grateful for it. Sometimes you hate it, right?
Oh, that's right. It could be your friend. It could be your enemy.
Yeah.
And as well. So yeah, I thought the game was a good game. It was the kind of game I think I'd rather have seen in person than on television.
Yeah.
I think I would have probably enjoyed that more.
I think too, very possession based, especially in that first half. And this was something that Coach Bobby emphasized. Pacific has an identity. They were not taking any risks. Apart from maybe those longer crosses you talked about in the opposing half, but
well, they've got some guys that are, that can play, and they're because they're rebuilding. Like I've actually not rebuilding, but changing their identity. I'm surprised. I mean, that's a record now. Five. Well, it was a record at 4. The old record in the CPL was 3 straight games without giving up a goal, complete games, and now it's 5. And that's pretty amazing to do that right off the hop too, because normally it takes a while to get your defensive formation set so that they can move in a really good pattern together, and it takes a while for the players to get the feel for each other. And normally there'd be more chances for you to break in there, but they look great that way, And now that said, too, Forge made some mistakes there, and as much as Kwasi Poku made a great couple of moves to get in, he was also offside 3 times. And really, and they mentioned this in the broadcast, and I thought they were exactly right. If you're playing that far outside, very rarely should you be offside, because you can see the whole thing in front of you. You can see the whole free, especially if you're alone out there and the ball's going to get to you anyways. It's not like you have to jump to get to the ball. You're going to get it if the cross is placed there pretty well. And it happened twice within a minute, or 2 minutes. And that I'm sure that's part of the learning curve. That's absolutely part of the learning curve. And I'm sure that's something Bobby talked to him about a little bit, and one would hope that he wouldn't make that mistake that much again. I mean, offsides are one of those things that can kill you in a low-scoring game.
They will want to crack down on those unforced errors.
Well, that's right. Yeah, that's a better way of putting it.
But yeah.
Unforced errors.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And at the end of the day, it comes down to the details. And I think those are the things that will make the difference, especially in a draw, as you said.
He wouldn't be as harsh as some of the announcers are. So many of the announcers come out of British-style soccer, where the use of the verb is very incisive. And I think squandered is the word they use an awful lot in that
are
case.
You serious?
Right? So, kid you not.
I actually feel like
it's a hell of a verb.
Squandered.
Don't you think? Squandered.
That's kind of,
yeah. I mean, you got something and it's in your hand, and you don't take advantage of it. You're squandering it. Right? So
you know what? Next time I watch a game, I think I might take some notes on the vocabulary as opposed to the actual matchup.
Yeah, I don't write the dictionary. I just read it. So
listen, Milty, before we move on, because I know I want to transition eventually to the next game, we'll debrief.
Yeah.
But you talked a lot about the cohesiveness of Pacific style of play and the big role that their back line has in that.
Right.
James Merriman has been with this program since it started, and he wasn't always the head coach. No. I believe he was an assistant at one point, maybe toward the beginning. And correct me if I'm wrong, did he play?
Yeah, he played. I think he played he did play. I can't remember if he was with them the first year or not.
Yeah.
Because he did play. I mean, I certainly remember him playing, and of course he played. Yeah, he played for the Highlanders. I think he played their very first year. And he had played for the team out there as well. So Highlanders, I think.
Yeah, something that we've discussed before, and you in particular appreciate, is the continuity of a presence, like of leadership. Tommy Wilden with Cavalry and Bobby with Forge. But how much of that cohesiveness that we just talked about do you think can be attributed to James Merriman's role in different ways, I guess?
Well, I think a lot, because I think if you look at where people have, maybe struggled at times in this league when they've come into a team, it's because they don't understand the league. And so the continuity is important to know what matters in the league as it is for your own players. So yeah, to have those people and understand who you have, but also if they're appropriate, the manner in which they are used to conducting themselves, because you got to change it if you don't. And you made a really good point there, Mac, when you talked about him. He wasn't always the head coach, so he doesn't, because this team has, they had the one great year and when they won the championship, but they've had some disappointments in there too. So you don't always have to be the head coach. This is where Bobby and then Tommy Wilden in Calgary are a little different. They don't actually, their voice isn't getting Sometimes it probably does, and probably within the room they may have somebody else speak. I don't know. Maybe sometimes Eddie does that in the room for them, or the players themselves. If you have the Kyle Becker types that are in the room, so you don't always have to be the head coach because you can lose them with your voice. So I thought it was a really good point that you made. I don't know if it was intentional.
No, yeah.
About him not having always been the head coach, but he's been there to say, hey, this is how the game has to be played here. And let's not wait till game 5 to figure it out. Because if you chase in this league, when you got two teams like Forge, Cavalry to some degree, and what Atletico looks like this, these teams look like they want to run away and hide eventually. And you want to be up there if you're one of them. First you got to get, you got to make sure this is where people like Valor have struggled. They can't even get to the middle group, but you got to get to that middle group, get used to that, and then move up to the top 3, whoever they may be. But you can always count on the fact that you're going to have to go through Forge and Cavalry to get there.
Right.
So
right. Well, yeah, I think because he wasn't always there, I think having that variety in terms of perspective.
Well, can you imagine though being a really, really good player that's been with his franchise for quite a while, learned type of thing, and then the coach comes in and you can see automatically that he doesn't get it right away? That has to be frustrating. Right. I don't know how often that's happened this league, but I think it's happened more than most of us would know.
I think, that's a really good point, because now I'm thinking about the conversation I had with assistant coach David Edgar. And Coach Eddie has exactly that perspective that I think a player would want, not only having them as a teammate, but have experienced themselves what the league is and how Forge, in this case, plays. Looking ahead now to our next episode, we'll be debriefing the Vancouver FC versus Forge matchup, this time Forge at home. Vancouver was an interesting team, especially last year being new to the league. I think they've, by the looks of it, they're figuring themselves out, and I think naturally that's a process that has to happen, but they just tied Atletico Ottawa, which, as we know, is not an easy task right now.
No, right. And they, the second half of that, the teams felt each other out a little bit there in that. But the second half of that game was, I didn't see it, but reading the reports from people I trust, it was, really, really exciting. And as you say, Mac, Atletico's considered to be one of the teams that's there. And they needed that. Vancouver needed that because they started strongly with a couple of wins, and then they had to go 3 games on the road, and they lost 2 of them. Right. So that's one of the things that Forge has to do is remind them, hey, you guys might have played okay in Ottawa, played well in Ottawa, but not that great on the road yet, and look at our home. We want to excel at home and can excel at home and, have been.
Right.
And, but they're right there. They're fourth. What are they played 5 games and they've got, I think, 6, 7, 8 points, something like that, and 7 points. And the 3 teams, though, at the top haven't lost yet, and that's at Atletico and Pacific and Forge. And Forge is in 3rd place technically, but points per match, they're probably ahead of anybody because they
got one less, right?
Yeah, they have one less game, and so this is big for Vancouver to try and show that they can play with Forge. They've got some pretty interesting guys there. They've got Alejandro Diaz, who won the Golden Boot in this league in 2022 with Pacific.
Nice.
Right, and he's got and the guy that used to set him up there, I think, was Callum as well. Is playing.
Well, I was just gonna say he is a very strong presence. He's the captain and the goalkeeper. So and so he was the guy, the goaltending, but they played together and they've got some history and they, feel good against Forge. He won the Golden Boot, and then he became, I think in 22, he ended up going over to Norway for last year. He was sold for a serious amount of money, second most ever in the CPL, behind, of course, Tristan Borges' deal the first year of the league, which was just a stunner when that happened. And now he's back, and he's a player, and you've got to be aware. He's one of those guys. When I do the 3 keys to the game, obviously Diaz is going to be one of those guys that you look at. I think he got 13 goals that year. He didn't win Player of the Year. That went to Ollie Bassett, I think, that year because Ottawa had such a good year. But again, it's an example of teams
kind of building up. And you're right, Mac, about Vancouver just trying to feel itself out. They're well owned. That team is well owned, and they'll do the right things. They got great. I think they're going to have good support over time in where they are. So, and it's very important for West Coast teams to show well. I mean, they're in the shadow of the Vancouver Whitecaps, so you've got to make sure that you get your share of the news space.
That's so true. Well. Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see because, as you said, a lot of these guys having proven themselves as individual players. I think this is the first time, or one of the first times, that they come together as a group wearing those Vancouver FC jerseys. And I think over the course of the season, you may see them, start to come together a little bit more. Yeah, I'm excited. That'll be, I guess, Monday's episode. They play on Saturday. So
right.
We hope to see everybody there so we can scare all the Vancouver fans away and their team, of course.
What will we be doing? I don't know now. Maybe we should check this out. So can I ask our viewers to do this? Just check out the schedule because it is a holiday.
Oh, it is a holiday.
Yeah. So we'll have a look. And that's the other thing. And that's sort of, if I can encourage people, if you heard about the game against Montreal and heard about how fantastic it was, there'll be a decent crowd. I won't be the 15,000 that we saw play against Montreal for the school day game, but the same kind of excitement will be there. And it's a long weekend. What are they calling this? A staycation game, aren't they? Isn't that the nickname of this game?
I think so.
Staycation, and that's the idea. And I think there's barbecues and that kind of thing. That's not my thing. I'm not a marketer by any means.
Listen.
Any team that I ever marketed would be out of business in a week. But I appreciate good marketing.
If we have the same weather as the last school day match, it will definitely be a staycation, and we'll all be tanning while watching the game. That's all for today's episode. Thank you all so much for tuning in for another edition of Mac and Milty. As for this week on the audio network, though, you can expect 5 days worth of content. We've got no midweek game for the first time, I feel like, in a while. So Monday through Friday, maybe refresh your feed because some of my favorite series are back and better than ever, including Behind the Beard and Max Access. So something that I'm looking forward to, and you should be too. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll be back to check in on the audio network tomorrow.
This has been Forge Daily with Mackenzie Barwell. If you like what you heard, please like, follow, subscribe, comment, and share.
I'm grateful the season's long because we're going to have 30 episodes.
30 episodes, yeah?
Something like that, yeah.
All right. And by the end of this, my hair will be
impossible. Actually, let's challenge you to not get a haircut until the last episode of Mac and Milty, and we'll see how long.
Keep reminding me.
Week.
It gets heavy. Like, you know what I found? I'm walking around. I feel light.
Do you?
Yeah.
You look light.
I feel lighter.
Yeah.
Well, I walk by the mirror and I still have my belly, but wait, how did I feel so? Oh yeah, it's my head. So.
All right.
I'm going to leave you with that. Always leave him laughing. Yeah. Always leave him laughing.
And scene.